Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be doing two book reviews of two memoirs that I read earlier this year, that I read during the summer. Now, I read quite a lot of non-fiction. It's just not something that I generally talk about on my channel because I kind of dip in and out of non-fiction. I read quite a lot of non-fiction at any given time just because I tend to just read what I'm interested in, and like I said, I kind of dip in and out, so it's kind of hard for me to do reviews. But these are two memoirs that I read and that I just absolutely fell in love with and enjoyed so much. I read them a while ago now, but because I haven't been filming, I obviously never got around to it, but both still stick in my mind for different reasons. And without further ado, let's just jump in. So the first one that I'm going to review is I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jenette McCurdy. I'm Glad My Mum Died is getting a lot of well-deserved praise. I remember when it first came out, it was like sold out everywhere. I got the audiobook because it is narrated by Jenette, and I personally think that if you have the option to read a book or a memoir specifically from the perspective of the person who wrote it, you should listen to it because you will feel the emotion in a way that you will never get from a book, because they are literally speaking the words into your ear. And the audiobook is just fantastic. I'm not the best audiobook listener. Like, I don't listen to tons of audiobooks, but this was one that I just absolutely fell in love with. Jenette's ability to tell her story, because not everyone's good at that, believe it or not. She is an actor, so she's probably got a lot more practice at it than most people, but the way that she tells the story with so much raw emotion is really quite something. If you don't know what this is about, and I don't know how you can possibly not know what this is about, it's about McCurdy's experience as a child star on Nickelodeon. It charts her journey as a young child up into the point where she's quite a bit older, a bit more mature, and we get vignettes into her life both before her mother died and after her mother died. The first half of the book I think is pre, and then the second half of the book is post. It's a really gritty tale that needs to be told, because I don't know about you guys, but I used to watch Nickelodeon a lot when I was a child, and I saw pretty much every single child star that I watched go into a really bad state at one point or another. I think there's maybe one or two that didn't, but pretty much every child star I watched at some point or another fell off the wagon. It's this kind of cautionary tale, right, of like young stardom and the lack of support that these children get, and they are children, when they are rising in fame and money. And it might look like a glamorous life, but in reality, at least the stories that I've read, and I've read and listened to quite a lot now, Jenette's not the only one, it's not the best life. Like, it's really not. And even though that, yes, they might have money and fame, if that's the things that you like, fair play, it's really not the goal that one should be aspiring to. And I think that is very much present in this book. The thing that I took most from the story is about the difficulty of parental relationships with their child. Parent-child relationships, I mean, I'm not a parent, but parent-child and relationships can be very difficult. And I think anybody everywhere can probably talk about an instance where, you know, they've disagreed with their parent, or, you know, whatever, you know, they've had an issue with their parent. It happens, and parents can do the same. But this is a really interesting dynamic because her mother is not only her mother, but she was also her agent. She was using her child as a commodity. We can see the impact that that had on Jenette's mental and physical health throughout the years. I've watched quite a few interviews with her now, like as she is now, and she's such a strong individual, and I'm so glad that, I'm not saying that she's completely overcome it, because trauma is trauma and I don't think you can ever fully overcome trauma, but I'm so glad that she's in a position now where she has been able to tell that story without feeling like she couldn't. She talks about that as well, about how telling your story, you should tell it whenever you want to tell it. I would be interested to know if she ever considered telling her story while her mother was alive. I don't think so. But if she had had the means to, would she have? Because, you know, it would have potentially led to some different interactions with her mother that she never really got to have. And I think the other really interesting thing is how she, you know, she loved her mum. She really loved her mum. She really cared about her. But their relationship was so toxic in every single way that it was almost this kind of Stockholm syndrome type situation. I mean, she was also a young child, at the start, and so she couldn't really protect herself. So anyway, I'm kind of going a little bit here, there and everywhere because there's so much to unpack. But if you're interested in, you know, child stars or just learning about like the inner workings of the disgusting world that is Hollywood and the way that they prey on children essentially, and the way that parents don't necessarily help that, then I think you would really like this. The only thing I will mention is that there is a lot of trigger warnings for pretty much everything, so it's a very heavy read, and if you're not mentally in the right space for that, I would recommend not reading it or just delaying it for when you feel like you can tackle some of that stuff yourself. So just bear that in mind. The next book that I am going to talk about is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. So Know My Name is a book that I'd heard of a few times. Chanel Miller is a name that I'm also very aware of because of what happened to her, but I didn't really know much about her story. I just knew that she was sexually assaulted on the Stanford campus and she was massively vilified by the media. That's all I really remember about it before reading this memoir. But then my audiobook credit came up and I saw that Know My Name was actually narrated by Chanel Miller herself. And for the reasons that I gave for the Jenette McCurdy audiobook, I will also say for this is there is nothing better than listening to a person's memoir said by the person themselves, because they will do the best job possible in telling their story. It's very raw, similar to, you'll see some common themes between both of these. I actually listened to these one after the other, which maybe not the best idea because they were both hopeful but very depressing and very raw. But that is it. The audiobook is very raw and it's very unapologetic and it really does go into details. It tells the story, as I mentioned, of Chanel when she went to a party on the Stanford campus. She woke up, I think it was like a couple of hours later, in hospital, not knowing what had happened. And it turned out that she was raped by one of the students on the Stanford campus. I think it's a story that any woman will find incredibly emotional, and man as well. I don't want to exclude people, but as a woman, I found it really emotional. I feel like every woman in one way or another has suffered from some form of sexual abuse, whether it's verbal or physical. And it brought up a lot of things for me personally that thankfully I've never been through anything as extreme as that, but it does bring up the daily things that happen to women when they're just trying to live their life and they're just trying to be themselves and they're just trying to go about their life not bothering anybody. And I think if in particular, if you're ignorant to that, then I think you should listen to this, because I think it does a really good job of making it feel very grounded and almost unemotional in a way, because the way she tells the story is quite clinical. And I don't mean that in a bad way. She just tells it very factually. And I really appreciated her for doing that, because these types of stories, of course, will always have an emotional aspect to them because of the absolute traumatic experience that this individual had to go through. But by making it almost emotionless in specific parts, it actually adds more gravity to it, because I don't know, I think it will help certain groups of people identify with it, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm making sense, but in my head it's making sense, so I guess we'll see. But I think the really interesting thing about the story, and we see this all the time, right, of rape victims and sexual abuse victims, where they're not often believed. They're often vilified by the media, by the opposition. And we see that in this story, and we see it from every single angle. And we see how this very normal young woman is thrown into a world that she didn't want to be thrown into. She just wanted to go to a party with her sister and have some fun. What ended up happening was completely out of her control. She dealt with it like an absolute champion, I have to say. We also learn about how it affects her everyday life, about the anxiety and the panic that she lived through every single day, about the relationships with her family and her friends and her work colleagues and her boyfriend, her inner strength and the support that her family and her boyfriend give to her throughout the trial. It's a story of survival, right? It's a story of somebody who's gone through an intensely traumatic experience and about how they deal with it as they try to live their every single day life, try to be normal again. The way that the book is structured is really good, because we get the kind of the now, then we get the preamble, then we get the trial, and then we kind of get the now again. It kind of comes full circle. I think it's a really effective way of telling the story, because it's like, here's what happened, here's the lead up, and it kind of flowed really nicely. In terms of like thematic work, I mean, I touched on a lot of it just now, but I think the biggest theme that I guess I kind of got drawn to was this idea of how rape culture is so normalized in many situations, but especially in university campuses. It's nowhere near as bad in the UK, but I've heard of many stories here in the UK and also in the US that do make me wonder, you know, what are these people doing to actually try to address these issues? I think, you know, I mentioned how both of these books have a hopeful note. The fact that there was legislation that was then implemented to help improve this is, you know, one of those hopeful signs, right? That there is an acknowledgement and an understanding that this is something that can't happen again. You know, it's similar to the Jenette McCurdy memoir. It's very gritty. Again, she doesn't hold back. And so if you're not in the right headspace, I would strongly recommend staying away from it. If you want to hear a story about a survivor and how she was able to get through it mentally and with the amazing support that she had, but ultimately, you know, she felt very alone and very isolated, then I think this is one that you should definitely pick up. And I strongly recommend the audiobook for both of the memoirs that I've just mentioned, because they're both phenomenal. I gave both books 5 stars. I don't see how you could give anything else, to be honest, because they are both really good. Like, they're both really good. And I think everybody will take something from it, regardless of who you are, where you are, what gender you are, like what you identify as. Everybody will take something from either one of these. I probably wouldn't recommend reading them back to back or listening them back to back like I did, but I recommend them either way. So let me know if you've read either one or both or neither, or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will see you down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay safe, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.